All right, everyone. Thank you. Well, first off, welcome to the webinar, and thank you for coming to the Trusted Sec from the Trenches: Stories and Strategies of Tabletop Success. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. This webinar is being recorded. The replays will be on our YouTube channel, so if you have to drop off early or you miss something, you'll be able to watch it later. If you have any questions for us, please enter them through the Q&A function within the Zoom controls, and then we will answer them as we see them come in, or at the end, we'll have some time at the end for questions and answers. And then if you're registered, as I'm sure you all are, you'll receive an email when the recording is finally available. So with that, let's talk about tabletops. And again, let me once more welcome you to From the Trenches: Stories and Strategies of Tabletop Success. If you don't know who I am, my name is Tyler Hudak. I am the practice lead of incident response at TrustedSec. I am very happy that I get to lead an amazing incident response team here. And just I can't talk about my team enough about how great they are. Personally, I have over 25 years experience dealing with incident response, incident handling, forensics, malware analysis, and so on. I am a huge gaming geek, so if anybody wants to reach out and talk gaming, especially tabletop role-playing games, definitely please reach out to me, and so we can have that conversation. But that's not why we're here, kind of. And I'll get into what I mean by kind of in a second. We're here to talk about tabletop exercises. So one of the things that my team does, the incident response team does, is, obviously we respond to incidents, but we have downtime between incidents. And one of the ways that we fill that downtime is by running tabletop exercises for clients. We have done a large number of tabletop exercises over the last 5 to 6 years. Ranging in scenarios from insider threat to business email compromise to ransomware to lots and lots of different things for many different types of organizations. And so because of that, because we have this, we've done so many tabletops, and because we have all this experience, we see a lot of things. And that's really what this discussion, this webinar is about. What is a tabletop? What should you expect of one? And then I'm going to go into what are the mistakes that we see when you're setting one up? What can we tell you to help you set one up better or get around the mistakes that we commonly see? And then when we're done with a tabletop, there are always recommendations or findings after that. What are the common ones we see? Because if we tell you what the common issues are that we see across multiple organizations, you can proactively go and take care of those now so that you don't have to worry about them in the future, or hopefully. So let's jump into this. So a tabletop exercise is an exercise where you test your incident response plans and procedures before an incident happens. So the way in general this works is you have a scenario that you come up with. It could be, an incident, it could be an event, a ransomware, a malware compromise, phishing email, and so on. And then you walk everybody through. Sorry, let me phrase that. You have everybody walk through, all of your incident responders walk through how they would respond to this. So why do you do this? Well, first off, you want to make sure that you can respond to that scenario. If your organization is very concerned about ransomware, then doing a tabletop exercise where the subject is a ransomware attack or a successful ransomware attack against your organization is going to show you how prepared you are for that type of attack. If you're concerned about insider threat, same thing. Do a scenario on insider threat to see how prepared you are for that type of incident. It's also going to find gaps in your technology as you go through and talk about how you would respond to I'm just going to use ransomware as an example. How you would respond to a ransomware attack. How would your EDR detect this, or how would you block it? How would you contain systems? How would you recover? You're inevitably going to find gaps in your technology that you can then fix proactively before something bad happens. One of the biggest reasons why we go through tabletop exercises is to make sure that the plans, your incident response plans, procedures, and playbooks work like you expect them to. Sometimes you'll get into these edge cases that you never planned for or never thought about. And so you then have to go back and modify your plan to make sure it works as expected. Or maybe you're going through your plan and find that nobody knows how to use it, or it doesn't make sense, or the flow chart that you have in there, if you even have one, it isn't quite right. And so this allows you to go in and make sure that it works like you want it to. Again, you want to make sure that everybody knows what they're doing. We get into a lot of I wouldn't say a lot. We have been in some tabletop exercises where once we get in there, and we start asking people what they would do, we kind of get blank stares back. There have even been cases where we walk into a tabletop exercise and there are people in there who didn't even know that they were part of the incident response process. So this allows everybody to see what they are responsible for. And then finally, one of the big reasons too is to validate that your third-party providers are doing what you expect them to do. I always get asked, should we invite our third-party providers, insurance, incident response, legal? Those are usually the top three. Crisis communications. Should we invite all those third-party providers to the tabletop exercise? And the answer is yes, absolutely. Because if you can do that, then you can see if they're doing what you expect them to do. We have been in cases, or I'm sorry, in exercises where a third party is in there. The client says, "Oh yeah, they would do this for us," and the third party says, "No, we would not do that for you. That's outside the scope of our work." And then the client is a little shaken because they didn't know that. So that's an immediate gap that comes out. So, how do tabletop exercises actually work? Well, first, you have a moderator. The moderator is the person who is in control of the exercise. They're the ones who are kind of leading it. Then you have the participants. These are everybody who would respond to a tabletop exercise, or sorry, to an incident. This could be, we'll get into this more as to who you should invite, but this would definitely be your technical teams, the business teams that would respond to an incident, executives, C-level, and so on. And what happens in an exercise is the moderator describes the situation, they describe the scenario, and they basically ask, what would you do? And the participants then describe how they would respond to that particular incident. So this may sound a little bit familiar to some of you, especially you gaming nerds out there, and I know that there are at least a few of you in attendance here. This is pretty much Dungeons and Dragons. This is pretty much a role-playing game. This is a game at the business level. I'll tell you a quick story. The first time that I ever ran a tabletop exercise many years ago, I'll admit I was freaking out because I had never run one before. This was before tabletop exercises were commonly done, and so there wasn't a lot of information out there. And it got closer and closer to that engagement, and I was really freaking out until one day I'm sitting there trying to figure out what I'm going to do, and I turn around and I have this huge bookshelf of role playing games behind my desk, and I looked at that, and then the realization just clicked that there was almost no difference between what I do on the weekends and this. Obviously, you don't need to be a gaming nerd in order to run a tabletop exercise. If you even just want to do a quick one, Backdoors and Breaches from Black Hills InfoSec is a great way to do a very fast tabletop exercise, and we'll talk about how often you should do those. But again, if you're a gaming nerd, I wanted to throw in the Dungeons and Dragons reference here. That's exactly what a tabletop exercise is. So outside of all the nerdy references, let's start talking about, what are the mistakes that happen? We work a lot with our clients when they are setting up the exercise. We get asked a lot of questions. And so I want to kind of dive into some of the biggest issues that we see when you're setting up the tabletop exercise. So the first one is not inviting the right people. We always get asked, who should we invite to a tabletop exercise? Our recommendation is always you should invite the technical subject matter experts and the business subject matter experts for within your organization. Basically, who is going to need to make decisions or perform actions during that specific scenario, and that's who you invite. Now, notice I say that specific scenario. The reason I want to focus on that is because you may have different people depending on the scenario. So, for example, if you had ransomware, you probably have a core group of people that would respond to that incident and make decisions. If you have an insider threat, you have a core team who's going to respond to that. There is likely overlap between the two, but there may be some groups that are in one and not the other. So, for example, in an insider threat, HR would definitely be involved, or they should definitely be involved. In ransomware, maybe not. HR may not be involved in that. So you need to kind of figure out who from both sides needs to be in there. On the technical side, like I said, you want the subject matter experts. In other words, who is going to be doing the hands-on analysis and recovery of the incident? And you're going to ask them, how do you respond? How do they respond to the incident? I know a lot of you may be thinking or saying, well, we have an MSSP, we have an MDR, we have an incident response retainer. They would be the ones doing that. And you are absolutely right. This is why I said you should invite the third parties that are doing this for you so you can understand how they do that. But there's also going to be some time where you don't call those people in, or there may be some delay before those groups, those third parties come in. And so your people are going to have to do something. You may not even bring them in on every type of scenario. For example, you're probably not going to call your IR retainer if you have a single system that has malware on it and you need to figure out what it did. You may not want to spend the money to do that. So there are going to be things that your teams have to do. So that's on the technical side. We also always recommend inviting the business. The way that the teams that are typically recommended to join are legal, definitely. Legal should always be involved in any tabletop exercises because they should have a lot to do with any major incident. And if you don't have internal legal or internal legal doesn't handle that, you have external legal, invite them. Communications is super important. We're going to be talking about this in one of the slides later on. Communications is very important during an incident, so you want your communications people being there. Senior leadership, they definitely need to be involved in the exercise because they're going to be making risk decisions on any major incident, or they're going to at least need to know what their responsibilities are or how they're going to be communicated to. I already mentioned HR. HR, especially for insider threats, you want to have involved. Sometimes HR does have responsibilities that within incidents that they need to be involved in. So that's another group that you should invite in. And then any business groups that are specific to the scenario. So, for example, if you were a manufacturing firm and you were doing uh, sorry, I'm thinking of the scenario off the top of my head. Let's say that you were your scenario was that you had sales compromised. You're likely going to want to have sales involved in the exercise because they're the ones who have that information. They're going to know how they respond, and so on. So inviting the right people is key, but do you invite them all to the same meeting? How do you handle this? Our recommendation is that you should not combine technical and business exercises. Now, understand this is very dependent upon your organization. If you are a really small organization and you have like maybe 5 people who would respond to an incident between technical and business, then yeah, combine them. That makes sense at that point. But if you're a medium to larger sized business, it may make sense to separate them. And the reason that we recommend separating the technical and business exercises is because they're typically run a little bit differently. At least we run them a little bit differently here at TrustedSec. So on the technical side, in the technical exercise, we typically do what I would call a traditional tabletop exercise. This is where you describe the situation and the participants are going to respond back to you. This is what happens. What do you do? Um, and it's really more of a free form discussion at that point. We're not necessarily giving them specific points within the exercise or within the incident. We want them to describe to us everything that they do. Now, on the business side, we treat it a little bit differently. The reason is because first off, I don't know if you've ever tried to schedule a meeting with your executives. It's really hard to do. Um, On the next slide, we're going to talk about how much time to dedicate to these meetings. But the business, you typically only get them for a very short amount of time. And so you want to separate that out because their role in the incident is probably less than the technical role. And so if you combine the meetings, then the business is just kind of sitting there doing nothing. They're getting bored. They're not paying attention. They're answering emails and so on. And so by separating these meetings out, then you are able to dedicate solely to the business and get a better get a better response from them. But in the business exercise, we treat it a little bit differently. We treat it as about half education and then half the exercise. And the reason we do that is because a lot of times the business side might have heard about these types of incidents, but they don't really know what they're about. They just know what the media is telling them. So ransomware is a great example. A lot of organization or a lot of business people have heard about ransomware attacks. They know that it's bad, but they don't know the ins and outs and the little bit and the details of what they will be asked to make decisions on, or they often don't. And so we use that as an opportunity to teach them about this type of scenario, about this type of incidents, what they should expect and the risks that are associated with them. And then as we go through each different piece of that, we will discuss the specific decision points and situations that they will need to make decisions on. So, for example, we're going to tell them, we're going to ask them what info do they need to make this decision, what actions would they take, and so on. A really good example of this is is a ransomware attack. Again, I'm going to keep going to ransomware. That's the most common scenario that we run, so it's pretty fresh in my mind. When you talk to the business, you're definitely going to be talking about the ransom payment. And so the way that we handle this is we will talk to them about what a ransom payment is. What does it mean to pay a ransom? Why might you pay the ransom? Why might you not pay the ransom? What are all the little gotchas that are going to happen? And then we're going to sit down and say, all right, we're back in the scenario. The attackers want $10 million. They've encrypted 50% of your systems. They've stolen all of this critical data that you have. They're threatening to release the data. IT is telling you that they can't recover for at least 2 weeks. Let's talk about how you would make those decisions around the ransom payment. And so that's how, as opposed to the technical side, if we were doing that in a technical exercise, we would say your ransom is $10 million. What do you do? So you can see that there's a big difference there. And obviously, the skill level of the different teams plays into this, but this is just in general why we recommend not combining the technical and business exercises. So you separate out the two meetings, the two exercises. How long do you dedicate to them? And that's really a big issue that we see, is that organizations really schedule too little time for these exercises. We have had clients try to schedule 1 hour for an entire exercise between both the business and the technical teams, and that is not enough. 1 hour is not enough to go through everything. In an hour, you can probably get through 1 or 2 points of an exercise. Now, how long you want or how long you need to go is very dependent on the depth you want to go in an exercise. If you want this just to be a traditional tabletop exercise where you're sitting around a table or a virtual table and you are asking questions and saying, what do you do? And people describe to you what they would do. The amount of time that takes is very different than if you tell the participants, this is what happened. Here's a system that we're going to use as a pretend system that is compromised. Go actually do what you're telling me to do. Like actually having them go out and contain the system and do the analysis and write up those communication documents and so on. That's going to take a lot longer. So the length of the meetings of the exercise is very dependent on how deep you want them to go. In general, though, I would recommend a technical exercise should be no less than 2 hours, and they usually go up to 4 hours. Sometimes they'll go a little bit longer, maybe up to 8 hours. Again, it's very dependent on your organization, how deep you want to go, and so on. The business side, I would say minimum 1 hour up to 2 hours. Again, this really comes down to you you often only get a limited amount of time with that audience. It's very difficult to coordinate the schedules of the C-level, of legal, of communications, and so on. And so if you can get an hour of their time, great. What I would recommend, if you can only get an hour of the business's time, is to have those key points in the incident that they're going to need to make decisions on and prioritize them so that you're hitting the ones that are most important up front. And then the ones at the end, if you get to them, great. That's just icing on the cake. So again, going back to the ransomware example, on a business one of the things that we may first talk about is the ransom payment, because we really want to know how are they going to react to a ransom payment. Then we talk about communications, and then at the very end, maybe we talk about something else related to the business that's really not that important, but should be brought up. So again, don't schedule too little time. It's always better to have more time than less. If people are always happy when you give them back time in their day. So I would always err to the side of scheduling too much time. One of the other big issues that we see with exercises is making the scenario too difficult. Now, before I go into all of these points, because I'm going to contradict myself here a little bit, if you were to hire a third party like TrustedSec to come in and do a tabletop exercise, we're going to go with the worst case scenario. You're not paying us to come in and do this really simple exercise. You want the most bang for your buck. We're going to, do the worst case scenario that we can come up with. That being said, if this is your first time doing a tabletop exercise or you're doing one internally, don't make the scenario too difficult. You need to look at the scenario, look at the audience and their experience level, and right size the scenario for that. So what I mean by that is, let's say you're doing an internal tabletop exercise. You don't need to make it the worst case scenario. Start off small. Start off with a fish that came in, or maybe one user that was compromised, especially if this is, again, your first time doing a tabletop exercise. Don't start off with the entire organization is down, data has left the company, the media is calling us. Don't start with that. Start off small, and then as everybody gets more experienced doing tabletop exercises, make it worse and worse as you go along. Like I said, start off small and build up, and then also make sure that you're using a scenario which everybody you invite can participate. One of the things that I hate is when we do a tabletop exercise and a specific business team gets invited, but the scenario doesn't take them into account because there's really no way for us to fit them in. So again, I'm gonna pick on HR. If we did a third-party breach scenario where you have a cloud provider that stored your sales information and that was breached, and you need to then respond to what would the organization do if this data, which is yours but you don't have control over, got compromised. How do you respond to that? I probably wouldn't invite HR to that because they probably don't have any responsibilities in that. I mean, I'm all for, having people come to watch, to learn, but if you expect them to participate, make sure that the scenario has ways that they can participate in. All right. Um, so that's with preparation, and again, there are other things that you can do to help prepare for an incident. I'm sorry, prepare for an exercise. One of the last things that I'll mention is I get mixed results when I ask people about this, but you're going to be drafting that scenario. One of the things that we get asked is, should we share the scenario with everybody who's going to be participating in the exercise? And my default reaction to that is no. Don't share the scenario outside the team that's designing it. And the reason that I say that is because it's kind of like sharing the answers to the test before you take the test. You want everybody's reaction and actions to be as close to reality as it would be, and if they know what the scenario is, they can kind of study for it beforehand, and say the right answers, which isn't always indicative of what would happen during an actual incident. So that's another one that I'll throw in there. But moving on from that, so we often get, or not often, on every exercise, every tabletop exercise that we do, we will have recommendations come out of it. Basically, we see gaps during the exercise that we want to call out, improvements that the organization can make. So I'm going to talk through a couple of the common lessons learned that we see during exercises. And these are ones that we see in almost every exercise, no matter the vertical of the organization, no matter how big the organization is, these always tend to come out. So the first one is incident response plan and procedure issues. So what I mean by that is you hopefully have an incident response plan within your organization. If you don't, please go and create one. There are lots of templates online that you can utilize to base one off of. If you need help, please contact us. We have some very smart people who know how to make incident response plans. They can help you out. But you should have an incident response plan. Now, the incident response plan is really a high level documentation that states the high level flow of the incident. So in other words, at a high level, not down to click here, respond to this, and so on, at a very high level, how does the incident work from detection all the way up through lessons learned? The incident response plan should also define the responsibilities of everybody within the organization who is going to be responding to it. So for example, your technical teams, what are their responsibilities? Legal, what is their responsibilities? Your C-level, what is their responsibilities? You're also going to define roles. So who is going to be the incident commander? So in other words, who gets to put on that Captain Crunch hat and control the incident and command everybody and make sure everything is getting done as appropriately? Is that the CSO? Is it a director? Is it the head incident responder? Is it somebody in IT? Who is responsible for doing that? Who is going to be the incident scribe? This is one of the biggest things that we see missing, is that nobody assigns a scribe. And if you're unfamiliar with the term, an incident scribe, their responsibilities are to take notes throughout the incident. That is their only responsibility. Do not give somebody who is supposed to be working the incident scribe job. That you should have somebody dedicated to this. The reason why the incident scribe is so important is because incidents are chaotic, especially major incidents. They are chaotic. They are crazy. People are going to be saying things. People are going to be doing things. If you don't have somebody taking notes as to who is doing what and what the information that you're finding is, I can almost guarantee that after the incident is over, you're going to have to write up a report, or you're going to have to present the incident to somebody like your board of directors. And there's going to be information that you need to know. If nobody was taking notes, it is almost impossible to regenerate that information. So that's why the incident scribe is so important. Not only should you define the responsibilities of the different roles and teams within the organization, you should also have a contact list as to who their backups are. This isn't listed on here, but I recommend having a contact sheet or appendix in the incident response plan, or at least linked out to where that sheet is, as to what everybody's contact information is, their backup contact information is, and who their backups are. Because Murphy's Law states that, and we have seen this multiple times, that the person you need to make a decision during an incident is not going to be available. To give you an example, we worked an incident actually this was last year, like early last year. No, so early 2023. The organization had to have some people on their board of directors make some decisions. Unfortunately, those people were overseas and did not have access to communications just because of where they were at. Because of that, some of these decisions were slower in being made than they normally would be. So make sure that you have that contact information and who everybody's backups are, as well as what their backup contact information is. So in other words, don't just have an email address. Don't just have a cell phone number. Have a backup email address, backup cell phone number, their home phone number, and so on. And obviously protect that information. Yeah. You also want, and so going back to the IR plan. Oh, one more thing about the contact information. When I am told that, oh yeah, everybody knows what everybody else's cell phone number is, or we have that in our cell phones, that's an automatic finding. It needs to be documented because people leave the organization, phone numbers change, things don't get updated. Your Exchange slash Outlook address book is not the contact list. But moving on, uh, back to the IR plan, you also want to have in there priority rating. So in other words, when you have incidents, hopefully they have different severities. So for example, you know, you may have your incidents or events rated as low, medium, high, and critical. Those should be defined in your incident response plan as to what those are. And then you should have service level agreements or internal SLAs written up based on those types of incidents. Typically, these are around. I'm going by memory here. So a lot of times these SLAs are mean time to detection. So how long do you expect your organization to detect a critical incident versus a low incident? Mean time to response. How long do you expect your organization to respond to a critical incident versus a low incident? Mean time to containment, to recovery, things like that. And obviously those SLAs can change based off of the situation, but they should be documented as to what you expect so that you can go then and make sure that you are uh, gathering metrics around your incidents. You can base your metrics around these SLAs, and there are other things that may be in your incident response plan around different types of incidents. Now, one thing you may have noticed is I did not say document the technical procedures for how you would respond to specific incidents in your incident response plan. Those should not be in your incident response plan. The incident response plan should be high level. Detailed response steps should be in your incident response procedures or playbooks. These are going to be dedicated documents that are broken out by incident type, or usually broken out by incident type, as to how you respond in a detailed fashion. So this is where you document, click here, log into the firewall to block an IP address, and this is how you do it. This is how you would, this is where you document it in ServiceNow or whatever ticketing system you have. These should be living documents. And what I mean by that is when uh, they should be easily modifiable. Incident response plans, because they have to be approved, typically only get updated once a year, whereas your incident response playbook may be updated multiple times in a month. If you get new tools, if you find new techniques for analysis, if you find out, oh, we need to be documenting this information as well, that's where it goes into those playbooks. Oftentimes, organizations are either missing these playbooks or they're not detailed enough or they're out of date. We talked to a lot where they're pretty out of date. So make sure you have those as well. And this is not, and these documents are not an audit checkbox. I mean, they are, but that's not their only purpose. Everybody that is working an incident or has responsibilities in an incident should be at least passingly familiar with the plan, the incident response plan, and the relevant playbooks that they are responsible for. This kind of goes back to oftentimes in an incident, or I'm sorry, in an incident, in an incident, but also in a exercise that we will see an organization, we will talk to an organization, and oftentimes they don't even pull up their plan. It is actually rare for us to see somebody talk about what the steps are in their IR plan or their IR playbooks. It happens so rare that when somebody does it, I actually call it out in the exercise as a good thing. So that's why I don't want people to memorize it, but they should know what's in there and know how to find the information at minimum. Another thing that we often see as an issue are around your tools. So for example, first off, you want to make sure that your tools are working as expected. And when I say tools, I mean things like your backup software, EDR, your network visibility, anything you would use to perform the investigation, to analyze systems, to perform containment, eradication, and recovery within the incident. Make sure that they work as you expect them. One of the biggest issues that we see is that an organization contains a system. They isolate a system through, let's say, EDR. And then we get brought in and we need to get information from that system. It's isolated, which is great, but we need to run, let's say, like forensic triage software on the system. If it's isolated, how do you log onto the system? How do you get the files that we need you to run onto that system? And how do you get us the data from that system. A lot of times organizations don't think through these things because they never had to experience them. Usually they contain the system and then it's reimaged. Well, you can't always do that in an incident. So, make sure your tools are working as you expect them and that you're looking at all the different areas for that system or for that tool that you would expect them to work. Another thing that we see is a lack of coverage on all systems. So the biggest thing that we see, EDR is either installed on workstations and not all servers, or EDR is installed only on Windows systems, but the organization has a whole bunch of Linux and Mac systems. I hate to break it to everybody, but Windows is not the only operating system that is targeted. Mac a little bit less so, but Linux definitely gets targeted all the time. So if you don't have your visibility, you don't have your tools deployed to all your systems, that's going to become a major issue during an incident. We often see this too with operational technology, OT networks. A lot of times there is very limited visibility into OT networks. And don't get me wrong, I understand why. You're usually dealing with very old operating systems. The network is usually segmented off, but you still need to have some type of visibility into those systems. They do get compromised. Those networks do get compromised. There may be backdoors into the network that IT or shadow IT or somebody has put in there that the attacker sneaks in through. OT networks are typically very important, and you don't want them going down, so you need to monitor them. And that's another thing that we see is there's typically very little visibility into those. And then finally, we actually see a lack of attack coverage. In other words, there are usually like specific types of attacks that an organization either doesn't account for or hasn't thought about and doesn't have the tools to help protect them. The biggest one we see is DDoS attacks, distributed denial of service attacks. Those are most organizations don't consider that as something that's going to happen to them until after it happens. And don't get I get it. On the scale of likelihood, that's probably on the lower side. But you at least want to have a playbook for how you're going to handle it. You're at least going to want to know who you're going to call. What are you going to do if you think that your firewalls are going to stop a DDoS attack and your firewalls fail, or you call your ISP and the ISP says, well, that's not in our contract. It's going to cost you another $100,000 for us to do that. Is your ISP even going to help you in a DDoS attack and so on? So, even just talking through some of these types of situations, they come out of exercises, tabletop exercises. All right. Sorry, I had to take a drink there. Moving on. Another big thing that we see, big issue that we see is it with third-party issues. I talked a little bit about this before, but some of the big things that we see during exercises or issues that we see during exercises with third parties is first off, do you have all the providers that you need? Do you know how to contact them and what you will do when you need them? And when we talk about third-party providers, we're talking about organizations that will provide services like cyber insurance, incident response, legal counsel, crisis communications, IT support, ransomware negotiation, and so on. A lot of organizations, they have cyber insurance or they think that they have cyber insurance and but they don't know what it does. That is always surprising to me that you are going to be paying probably hundreds of thousands of dollars at least to an organization, to cyber insurance, and you don't know what they're going to do for you. Make sure you know this. Make sure you know who is going to contact cyber insurance, and most importantly, make sure you know when you need to contact cyber insurance. And again, what services they're going to provide you. Incident response, if you have an incident response retainer with somebody, which I highly recommend doing. I know I'm a little biased with that, but if you have an incident response retainer with somebody, know how to contact them. Know what their SLAs to get back to you are. If you don't have an incident response retainer, at least know who you're going to contact. Will cyber insurance provide that for you? If you don't have cyber insurance, who are you going to call? Same with legal counsel. Same with crisis communications. IT support is very important. You likely cannot work your IT teams 24/7 for very long. In a ransomware attack, you're going to have round-the-clock support. And if you need somebody to augment your existing IT, who are you going to do with that? And then finally, Like I said, ransomware negotiation, that is a very specialized skill. If you don't know what you're doing, you should not be communicating with the attackers. Find somebody who knows how to do that, or make sure that cyber insurance will provide that for you. And again, when do you contact these providers? Usually it's, pretty early. Sometimes it's also who is going to contact them. Who's going to contact cyber insurance? Who do you know, or who are you going to call at cyber insurance? One of the one of the issues that we see during incidents actually is somebody calls cyber insurance and they only have their broker's phone number, and the broker is not going to handle the incident. They're going to refer them back to somebody else. And if it's the weekend, your broker is not picking up the phone. You may hear back from them on Monday, and so know who to contact, know the correct procedures, and so on. And then again, what are they going to do for you? um, are they going to do what you need them to do? And if they aren't going to do what you need them to do, who can do that for you? At least understand all of these. We get into a lot of tabletop exercises where somebody assumes that a third party is going to do something for them, and it turns out that they actually will not. I mentioned before that communications are very important. And I think communications and communication plans during an incident are one of the most overlooked pieces of the incident response plan, which is sad because it is extremely important. You can go out and look online and find examples of who communicated well during an incident and who communicated poorly. And so during your tabletop exercise, on the business side, if you have to limit uh, in your business exercise who you're inviting, I would number one start with legal, and number two uh, communications. Those two groups should always be involved. So what are the issues that we see with communications? First off, that there isn't a communication plan, or that the organization assumes that everything will be okay. The issue is you can't always control the narrative. So in a communications the communications aspect of an incident, you always need to stay ahead of the narrative. And a lot of organizations think that they can just send out a press release and all is good. And unfortunately, that is not the case. If the media or the attackers get control of the narrative, that always ends badly for the organization. You also need to know, or you also need to have a communication plan that states who to communicate with. It's not just clients or the public. There are lots of different places or people that you need to communicate with. Internal employees. Your employees are going to be asking questions. They're going to be having that water cooler talk. If you don't communicate with your employees, they're going to start talking to each other, and they may even start posting on social media and online. There is an excellent example of this a number of years ago where a hospital system was compromised with ransomware, a major hospital system. They weren't communicating to their internal employees. Their employees were then getting on Reddit. They started a Reddit thread and were communicating to each other and talking to each other about the internal aspects of the incident on Reddit. The media saw this, and you can actually see reporters posting in this Reddit thread saying, "Hey, I'm from the media. Can somebody email me? I want more information." And I'm sure that they actually were. So communicate with your internal employees. Make sure your help desk knows what to say to employees when they call the help desk to ask what's going on. You're also going to need to communicate with your clients and partners. These are going to be the people who are affected, the organizations who are affected because your services may be down or their data may be affected. How are you responding to them? Who is responding to them? If you have salespeople, are you giving them templates or statements to talk to them about? If and so on. Law enforcement, you may or may not contact. This is definitely a legal decision. But eventually, if you are under any type of regulation, you're going to have to report this to regulators, especially with all the new SEC stuff that's going into effect or has gone into effect. You are going to need to report this. So understand who is going to be doing that and when they're going to be doing that. And obviously, this becomes even more complicated if you're an international company. I already mentioned insurance. again, make sure you know who is going to contact insurance when you need to contact them and so on. And then finally, yes, you are going to need to contact the media and public or release statements if the incident is big enough, if the attacker starts communicating to your clients, if the attacker starts publishing your data and so on. One of the big things to keep in mind, and I don't have a slide in it for this, but also remember that you may not be able to use your normal communication systems. Your email may be down or untrustworthy. Your websites might be down. So how then are you going to email your clients? How then are you going to release a press release if your website is down? You need to have these out-of-band communications systems set up prior to an incident. Make sure that you have communications playbooks and procedures. This is something that the communications team should set up. I would not expect IT to set this up. Um, the communications team should have the procedures on how they're going to do all of this. Not only that, they should also have templates that they can use that have been pre-approved and then that can be modified during an incident. So in other words, have a communications template for a ransomware attack, for a data breach, and so on. Yes, you're going to have to modify that, but at least you're going to have that base language available to you. All of these things are typically missing when we perform an exercise and start talking to communications. All right. One of the other things that we fortunately we don't see this a lot, but it does happen every once in a while, is that you should not do an exercise with bad intentions. And what I mean by that is um, the goal of a tabletop exercise should be to find gaps and improve processes. You want to see where you can improve your incident response procedures and plans and make sure that if you do get attacked or there is a successful compromise of your environment, you are able to get through this as quickly and efficiently as possible. Sorry, I'm jumping back a second. Don't use this to call out specific groups about the bad things that they're doing. Don't use this to point out flaws in people or specific groups. It's going to end badly. We have a statement in our exercise when we have a couple intro slides. And one of the things that we say in there is that the moderators, who is us, have the final say on all disagreements, questions, or disputes. And I often joke, oh, we've rarely had to break up fights. Rarely is the key word. We have actually had to do that. We have actually had to ask people to leave the exercise. It's not fun to do. And so make sure that, you have good intentions going into this. Well, another thing that we often say is that it's okay to disagree with the scenario, but go with the flow. A lot of people will get the urge to say, well, that could never happen in our environment. And they may be right. The situation that we're going through the exercise with may not be able to happen in their environment. But I can tell you from experience, my job and my team's jobs exist because all of those things that should never happen do happen. Technology fails, procedures fail, people make mistakes. And so, it's okay to say, yeah, this probably couldn't happen, but just assume for whatever reason it did. So then you can continue on with the exercise. Like I said, do not use the exercise to shame other groups, to blame others for issues, to call people out, or to argue about every little detail. That is just it's counter to the whole purpose of the exercise, which is really to make sure that you're finding gaps and improving your processes. Jumping back onto the geeky bandwagon here to kind of reinforce this a little bit. You want your tabletops to end like this. You want everybody to be happy. Well, I guess as happy as they can be for having after a 2 to 4 hour tabletop exercise. But you should end it with having those recognition of who is doing the good things and where you need to make your where you need to make your improvements. It should not end like this, where it's chaos. The monsters are coming out. People are going crazy. That you walk out of there with this really, really bad feeling in the pit of your stomach. But with that, we're at the end. I see that there are some questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to kind of go through those. Please, if you have any other questions, please use the Q&A function to ask, and then I will respond to it. So the first one, as you conduct tabletop exercises, What metrics and notes do you look at to evaluate progress from one tabletop exercise to the next? That is a great question. So, as you move from tabletop exercise to tabletop exercise, how are you determining that you're making progress? I think really the key way to do that is look at the gaps that you had in the prior exercises and seeing if you're still seeing those gaps in exercises moving forward. That's the biggest way that I would see. So, for example, let's say one gap was you didn't have communications templates, and that was on the last tabletop exercise. If you go into this tabletop exercise, the newest tabletop exercise, and you find out that you still don't have communications templates, then to me that would be a place that there wasn't much progress. But if they are there, then great, you've actually made progress. I can't think of any like specific metrics to say that, oh, you're at a 2 here and then a 4 at this next one. That's very hard to quantify. I would look at what improvements are being made from exercise to exercise. The next question: what are some suggestions for tools to document an incident? Love this question. Really, it comes down to what what the organization is most familiar with, or what you're utilizing for potentially out of band. I have seen organizations document in the ticketing system. So if you have like a ServiceNow or whatever other ticketing systems are out there, you can absolutely document in there. If you use something like Google Workspace for your out of band system, I would just open up a Google Doc that's restricted to only people within your workspace and take notes in there. I have seen people use Notepad. The big thing for taking notes or to documenting an incident is to make sure that it's protected and in the end is readable by everybody. I think I answered that question. If not, let me know. Are you able to provide some sample scenarios or a good place to find some? So I mean, I will be more so I don't have any like written up that I could send out or point you to from the TrustedSec side. But there are places online where you can find tabletop exercise scenarios. There is actually a Twitter account. I can't remember its name. If anybody knows the name of that and can throw it into chat, please do so. But there's one specifically around basically pulling out tabletop exercise scenarios and kind of posting them in Twitter. But what it comes down to is what I would recommend is sitting down and thinking about what are you most concerned about, or what are your executives or your business most concerned about? Are they most concerned about ransomware? There's your scenario. Are they concerned about phishing or business email compromises? There's your scenario. Or look at what everybody's talking about in the news. We pull a lot of our scenarios, or even some of the injects, the like curveballs that we throw at everybody for a scenario, from news stories of things that are going on, because those are all the weird situations that nobody ever think will happen and actually do. Yeah, those would be the things that I would suggest for that. Let's see here. The IR templates I mentioned, are these something we can go to our account manager and request? Yes, absolutely. If you want to work with us to obtain templates for procedures, processes, and so on, definitely talk to our account managers. I will also point you to there is a website, at least for incident response playbooks. I think it's actually called incidentresponse.org. Go ahead and they have some kind of generic playbooks for different types of incidents there as well. In the end, just Google or search online incident response plan template or incident response playbook template, and you'll find a bunch of places that will give you some ideas, or you can even see examples of ones online. And some organizations publish them freely as well. So, for example, Microsoft has a lot of different playbooks that are published for free on their GitHub. How often do I recommend doing a tabletop internally? That's a great question. I would say internally, and when I say internally, I the way that I take this is that you're asking how often should you run your own, not necessarily bringing in somebody. I would say 2 to 4 times a year. If you can do one once a quarter, that's awesome. And remember, it doesn't have to be something huge. Make it small. Make it use backdoors and breaches and run through a game of that in a team meeting. That's a tabletop exercise. So I would recommend doing it at least once a half, if not once a quarter. If you're going to do it throughout the year, like once a quarter, I would, and again, I'm a little biased here, but I would recommend bringing in an external third party to do at least one of those, because you're at least going to get that outside perspective as for the scenario and for the incident, and they may bring up things that you never thought of. All right. Let me see here. Looking through here. Who should we contact at TrustedSec if you would like to discuss facilitating a tabletop? I love this question. Reach out to sales, sales at TrustedSec.com, or honestly, if you need to get a hold of somebody, feel free to reach out to me. I don't think my contact information isn't in here. I apologize for that. But here, you can follow us at TrustedSec.com. You can reach out to sales at TrustedSec.com. My email address is tyler.hudak at TrustedSec.com. I'm going to jump back to my bio just so you can see the spelling of my name. Let's see here. Somebody, I'm not going to say your name because I will butcher it. I apologize. Mentioned that you can pick up public cyber incidents, read the TTPs, convert it to stories and scenarios, and you're good to go. I 100% agree with that. And then they also posted the link, www.incidentresponse.org/playbooks. Yes, that is where I was thinking you can go there and find a lot of different playbooks. And then I think I have probably time to answer this last question. Let's see here. I was thinking of tools along the lines of Jupyter notebooks that would be outside the normal apps of the org. Some of those might be. Oh, okay. I think yeah. So along the lines of what you could use to document your incident. Definitely, I would recommend using something that's not within your infrastructure. So don't use Visio, or I'm sorry, not Visio. Don't use OneNote if you have Microsoft 365. Don't use. I can see where you might not want to use your ticketing system, because that goes into you have these out-of-band systems because you don't know if the attacker is reading your notes, is reading your tickets, and so on. So yeah, something like a Jupyter notebook would be great for something like this. There are some specific applications and companies which provide this type of information. I can't think of any off the top of my head, and I have very little experience with them, so I'm not going to recommend any. But talk to your MDR. If you have an MSSP or an MDR, talk to them, because they may already have a system that you can use to take notes during an incident and store those notes and so on. All right. So unfortunately, we're out of time right now. So I want to thank everybody for being on the webinar. Like we said, it is going to be published. If you have any other questions, please reach out to us. I am more than happy to answer any questions that you may have in the future. Talk tabletop exercises, talk gaming, whatever you would like. So with that, thank you all very much.